What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another special edition to the Rated G podcast. I'm your host, G. Terado. For those of you who are new here, welcome to the show. This is a podcast where I like to sit down and talk about art and creativity and other things in life. And I often sit down with fellow artists and creatives and in the hopes to promote their brand. So if you enjoy this type of content, please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, share with a friend, ring the notification bell. That way you can keep up with the new uploads, and leave comments or questions down below, because I'm always open to responding to them, especially with questions. I'd love to answer some questions for you if you have any. And yeah, if you want to check out our social media, links will be provided down below as well. And yeah, did I forget anything else? I don't think so. I am trying something as per usual. I'm trying something different, right? I see a lot of big podcasts doing this thing where they kind of when they have guests on the podcast, they'll have like a beginning segment where they're kind of like the hosts or just the host, depending on the show. They're just kind of catching up with the audience, talking about current or recent events, and then eventually they bring in their guests. So I'm gonna try this formula. Hopefully this helps the growth of the podcast. I honestly, I'll only know just judging by the numbers and if people chime in the comment section. So again, as I said before, don't hesitate to leave any comments, even if they're like negative. Like, I don't want to say negative comments, but if you got some criticism, I am 100% open to them. And if you have suggestions, you know, again, I'm all open to it. So yeah, so since I guess let me think, shit. Well, recently, my wife and we hosted a housewarming party finally, after living in this house for, like 2.5 months, I'd say. Um, And hey, we made it through February without our heater working. I mean, we got our space heaters, but yeah, still waiting on that shit. Um so yeah, we hosted a housewarming, and everything worked out. People showed up. It was a lot of fun. And yeah, it's kind of funny because me and Nicole were talking about, kind of feeling the anxiety a bit, because we haven't hosted in such a long time. Before we moved down here, we used to host New Year's Eve parties, and that was like a big thing for us. We'd have all our friends come over and just, throw down. So we haven't done anything like that while living here in Richmond. So to finally be able to throw something together and have a bunch of people like who actually aren't familiar with each other, that was probably the nerve-wracking part for me. Was like, I have so many friends that have yet met each other. Like, a few of them were sort of acquainted, like with my in-laws, but generally, yeah, there were uh people that just they didn't know each other. But I mean, just witnessing that was such a beautiful thing. And yeah, I mean, and it's funny too. I was thinking about this afterwards. I'm like, man, I wasn't even out, like, just not being on my phone. that that whole evening, that whole night was refreshing. Like, just being present with my friends and just chopping it up and catching up. It was really nice. And yeah, I really look forward to hosting more gatherings, especially with my fellow artists. You know, yeah, so hopefully that will eventually come to fruition. Um, Ideally, I want to be able to do that when we have more furniture, especially in our basement and, the podcast room. So yeah, in due time it will come together. But it was a lot of fun, and I'm glad it worked out. And yeah, it just gives me, I don't want to say hope, but it makes me excited for, the rest of the year, really. Um, so yeah, that was a lot of fun. Um, and then actually real recently, like just this past weekend, a couple of days ago, I visited a friend. He was working at a market called the Mystic Market, and he does tarot readings. So I thought I'd swing by just to show support. And he actually, we did a reading, and I'm like always on the fence about those type of things. Um, like sometimes I believe them, and then sometimes I'm like, well, maybe, that's but you know, when we were going through the car, it's like just everything he was saying, everything he was reading off was just too goddamn accurate. So during that moment, I was a believer. I was like, okay, like, there's some substance to this shit. I shouldn't say shit. It's not shit. But yeah, I mean, a lot of things that we were talking about, it just was like really kind of hitting to the core for me, because of past incidents and what I'm currently going through. So I'm like, all right, this is like really resonating with me. So it was a wonderful experience. So, shout out to Sawyer, aka Irish Wake Tarot. If you want to follow him on social media, especially if we have any local listeners and viewers um in Richmond, go give him a follow on social media. Again, it's Irish Wake Tarot. There are underscores in between those words. Um, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a good time catching up with him too. So that happened. And okay, now I'm gonna kind of switch gears a bit. Uh, I I mentioned my excitement for the live action Avatar: The Last Airbender on Netflix. I saw the preview. Preview looked rather promising, at least just visually. Things looked pretty accurate to the cartoon, but there were some things that were being talked about that caught my attention, and something that I was actually reminded by that my wife told me, and I was like, oh shit, I completely forgot about that. And that thing was that I think this was like talked about maybe a year ago or two, that how the original creators of the the cartoon, they ended up departing from this project, and I completely forgot about that. And now, having watched the show, I get it. I get it, because I gotta say, I was watching the second episode last night, and it was so unbearable. Maybe I'm being a hard critic about it, but it was just so tough to watch. I mean, and I feel like I'm done with the show just after watching these two episodes. Like part of me feels like there's still a little bit of leeway of me being, you know, persuaded to continue to watch, or to watch one more episode, but I'm really leaning on not. But But one of the things before the show came out, the things that were being reported is just how, um, you know, I don't know if you can attribute this to wokeness. I mean, it kind of is, but there are a lot of things. There are these important elements of the cartoon that were taken out of the live action. Now, I get it. When you do a reboot or a remake of something, obviously you can't expect it to be exactly the same, right? You don't expect the show to match the cartoon frame by frame. That's fine. If you want to change things up a little bit, maybe the dialogue's a little different, whatever. But there are these elements that were um, very important for the story, for the character developments, and they took that out of the live action, and it just really kind of pulled it. Just like, I don't know, it. Well, how should I say this? It really just kind of took me out of it, really. Like, I'll say spoiler alert, okay? Um, because, like, so in the cartoon, the first previous avatar that you're introduced to is uh Avatar Roku, right? He's the avatar from the Fire Nation, right? He has a very big role in the whole thing, but instead, for the show, they decided to. I mean, so far they haven't mentioned him. Again, I've only watched 2 episodes, but from what I've seen and what's been presented in the show so far, zero mentions of them. All right. They instead went with leading with Avatar Kyoshi of the she was an earthbender. And I mean, she's badass. Don't get me wrong. She's a bad bitch. And I mean that respectively. But yeah, I mean, it's so sad. Like, so they decided to bring her in first. She's the one that gets in contact with Aang in the spirit world, and it's just like, I mean, and so when you watch it, you kind of see these you start seeing the agenda of like the feminist agenda, I'd say. All right. A lot of focus on women empowerment and all that. And like, that's cool. I mean, they got these badass bitches in the show, in the original series. Like, so I'm all for it, but the way they executed it for the live action was just like, I just think it was done poorly, maybe even misguidedly. Is that a word? Misguidedly? Probably not. But it just like, and I just like the film that we shall not name by a certain, you know, film maker that who also shall not be named for this sake. But when I watched like the introduction of it, I immediately felt this uneasy. I had this uneasy feeling in my gut. I'm like, I don't know about this. I'm feeling a little funny about it. Something feels off. So, I mean, thankfully they got the original music included in the series. Like so it still gives a vibe of the show. And I'm gonna say that's probably like the one thing that's for me is kind of saving it. Is like, oh, it's cool seeing like the soundtrack going along with the show instead of like some original new shit. But yeah, there's something. So I feel so aside from that with Kyoshi and you know this whole push for um the female roles, um so the acting is something about the acting is funky. Like me and Nicole were talking about, I was like, yeah, it just feels like the acting is just kind of bad. I don't know if it's like certain certain actors are overacting or underperforming. Um, but like the acting feels off. Like, and maybe it's the script too, but the way Nicole described it is that these characters speak, like they sound too American, right? Um, Not that like we want these characters to have Asian accents or anything, because like obviously they didn't do that in the cartoon, but the way I describe it is like they sound too modern. Like something about the mannerisms for some of these characters are like they just seem out of character. Um, so like again, spoiler alert, in the second episode, they introduce General Zhao. And like he's a pretty ruthless dude, right? But in the show, like he's just like not that ruthless. I don't even know how to describe how the actor portrays him, but it's just like I don't know, like the Fire Nation are they're meant for you know, their um I don't know, like they're these like kind of like arrogant, brutal, merciless type of people, but I don't know, again, there's just something about the way, at least particularly with General Zhao. I'm like, this dude, like, he doesn't seem threatening at all. Like you know, um, his demeanor and all of that. Like, it didn't feel like I was watching General Zhao. And same thing with like Uncle Iroh. Like, I don't know if they used an actor that's like a bit young for what Uncle Iroh should be like, age wise, or like or just the way he acts too. Like something about the way they chose this actor. And I don't know his name, but he's been in like you seen him in like later like the newer Star Wars movies. I think he was in Mandalorian. He was one of the um what do you call it? Not the Resistance. Is it the Resistance? I'm not like a big super Star Wars fan, but he was one of the pilots. I think he's also he's one of the main he's in the what's that other Netflix show? It's like the Asian family with the like the store they own a store. Oh, what is that? I forget the name, but he's been around. Whatever. So anyway, just the way he portrayed Uncle Aro felt uh off. Um, Aang is like super emo. Same with Prince Zuko. Like, I mean, you could argue that he's emo too, but like in the he lacked like the angst. Like he just see in the show, he just seemed too emo and whiny. Um, Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm not seeing the badassery of these characters that you kind of like get from the get-go in the cartoon. But again, I might be being a harsh critic, but I don't know. I'm just not feeling it, man. Um and like Katara, me and Nicole were talking about how like Katara in the show, she she seems too young. Like the way she's like just her character seems too young in the cartoon. She's very responsible. She kind of has that like motherly characteristic to her, but that like doesn't necessarily show in this live action series. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's again, I feel like the push for like the feminist agenda is like very prevalent. And I don't know, man. And like, so one of the things that I heard before the show came out was that, they took like the whole sexism element out of the show because, with Sokka, he's like, I guess you would say he's he's got the toxic masculinity, but that's so important for his character in the cartoon because he goes through this character arc where he develops into a better person, like like it's part of his whole character story. So just having that taken out of, and like the last thing I'm gonna say too, because this was, I just saw this last night, because he had, him and Suki. She's one of the Kyoshi warriors. She's a bad bitch. She's one of the bad bitches there in the series. And instead of him developing sort of a crush on her, it was flipped. And she kind of, it's like kind of funny because it's very predatorial, might be a bit strong, but she was just like, man, she was just all about eyeing him and just like following him and sneaking up on him and all this. Like, it's just something. It's just something about it. Just it was corny, man. Some of the fight choreography. Like, I'm big when it's, especially when it comes to martial arts. I'm big on like fight sequences and the choreography. So that felt a bit lacking. I mean, I'm just happy to see the fire bending being utilized correctly, but they're just like, in terms of like, I don't know, something, it seems slow also. Like, when you see the earth bending, it seems slow. Like, everything kind of just seems slow, where in a cartoon when they're bending, it's like they are one with the element. Like, everything is immediate. Their actions and movements when when they're bending, like the elements move along with them, whereas in the show, it feels like they do the movement and then the thing, and then it happens, as opposed to being such a fluid, you know, thing. So, yeah, yeah. And one more last thing I'll mention, and I'll move on, is the way they introduced Aang. They made it look like he's flying, like he's able to fly. And in the cartoon, he doesn't fly. I mean, he uses his air bending to help give him like that boost up, high jumps, or like, to soft landings. But in the show, the way they introduce him, they made it look like the dude was flying. It's like, what? So I'm gonna digress now, because yeah, I don't know. That was just, if you've seen if you've seen the show, please, I really would like to hear your thoughts on it. Again, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment, below. If you're listening, I don't know, hit me up on social media, shoot me a DM, and let me know what you think about it. Um, and I'll just segue into this, because mentioning the feminism, right? This feminist agenda. This is gonna be a strong claim, and people, I don't expect you guys to agree with me, but I don't know, if you kind of follow this, like, I mean, I see a lot of it's in my algorithm now, so I am seeing a lot of it. But when I I believe wokeism is killing creativity and these cherished IPs that we grew up loving as kids. You know, I mean, this is regarding, I mean, Hollywood, Disney with Marvel and Star Wars. I mean, don't even get me started with X-Men 97, because I was I was excited at first, and now hearing reports on like how this show is being handled, I'm I don't even think I'm gonna give it a chance, man. Um, and so, and like video games too, man. Like, the video game industry is like starting to take a bit of a downfall with all this, DEI stuff. And I mean, I'm all for diversity, equity, inclusion, and all that stuff, but like, there's a way to do it, right? There's got to be a natural way to do it. And it just seems like when they push that on the audience, especially like on the loyal audience, the loyal fans of these IPs seem to not want that. They want the thing that they grew, that they, that that drew their first interest. And now they're making these switches to, I get it, you want to expand your audience and stuff, but it's just, I don't know, if you want to do the whole DEI, man, try to, I mean, and they do try, it fails, but try something with like some fresh ideas, some new stories. Because like it's being proven that when you have a product, if you have a movie or a TV series, and the story is just authentic, there are no agendas being pushed on the audience whatsoever. Like people like it. People like it. And but when they enforce these things, like, feminine, like, Sony's Madam Web. No, like who asked for that? Like I get it. You want to draw in more of a female audience for like the whole Spider-Man verse, the Spider-Verse, but it's like I don't think anybody really asked for a Madam Web movie. Like there's so many things that you can do before that. So, yeah, I don't know. And I saw they claim that supposed to be a standalone movie, but I guess there's a lot of references to Spider-Man. So it's just like I don't know. I don't know. But again, I'm gonna try to digress from that because it's a messy situation for cinema and apparently for video games. Like I saw complaints about, Suicide Squad kills the Justice League. And even with is it Square Enix that still does the Final Fantasy games? Like I guess there's like a new version of Final Fantasy 7 and they're like making these changes with one of the characters, Tifa. Um I think they made her a lesbian or something. I don't know. I don't know the full details, but again, when you see the numbers and you see the charts, you see it's very you know, it's very obvious of what's happening. Like you can see it. The numbers don't lie. But I'm not gonna say I'm sure there's people out there that still enjoy this content, Like there are some of those uh, you know, those few people that still enjoy it. Like, I mean, there's claims that Madam Web was worse than Morbius. Now, I've never seen either of those movies, but according to the numbers, that seems to be the case. But there have been some people in the comments saying, "Look, oh, I still enjoyed it. I don't think it's worse than Morbius." So, like I'm sure there's people out there that still enjoy the direction that these movies and video games are going. But when you focus on the loyal fan base of these IPs, I mean, the vast majority of them are unhappy about the direction it's going. So, again, like, Disney's taking a huge fall because they're going against their fan base. They're not listening to their fans. And, when you do that, look what happens. So, anyway, that I'm just gonna end with that. And before I bring in my guest for today, I just want to plug in real quick. For for the locals, all right, for the local Richmond community, April 27th, I'm going to be at the pop-up RVA market at the Diamond Stadium. So if you want to come say hi, check out my artwork, see what I got, for sale, yeah, swing by, say hello. And also, just for everyone in general, I am open for commissions. I'm really trying to push that, out there, letting people know that, I want to create personalized art for you guys. Um, because I've yet to build up my schedule for markets. So, if you're interested on custom art, hit me up. Go down below, find my social media links, and send me a DM if you have any questions regarding commission art. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions and all questions. All right. So let's take a quick break, and we shall be right back. I need some water before I start this. If only I had a delicious sparkling water in a badass looking can. Hey, wait. Good thing I have liquid death to murder my thirst. But while I'm at it, saving the environment by eliminating plastic. Every can sold, 10% will go towards plastic pollution. So, death to plastic. So, ladies and gentlemen, and non-binary, of course, joining me for the first time is a fellow local artist and a therapist. Not both in the same, not a, not a art therapist, but he happens to be a therapist as well, and we'll be getting into that shortly. Yeah. So without further ado, I always take too long with these intros. Without further ado, let's welcome for the first time Alistaire McKemy.
Thank you very much. Love the energy, G.
So I usually do better, but I don't know. I think because I'm like my routine.
Dude, you're good. No, I love it. This is the most hyped I felt in a while. So this is good. I appreciate it.
Yeah, because like when doing the podcast through Zoom, I feel like it's to kind of, I don't know, I guess give that hype, just clapping for my get. I don't know. I just always thought at least the visual on your end, just seeing it clapping for you would help a bit.
That's good stuff. It's good affirmation. Good. It's just good to feel good, right? I mean, the world feels like it's on fire most of the time anyway. So
yeah,
do what you can where you can.
Yep, I feel that. But how you doing, my friend?
That is a good question. I always feel like that is like a really, and this is a personal when I say it's such like a loaded question because everything is going on. It's funny because in my practice, like, yes, I am an artist in my, or excuse me, I'm not an artist. I'm a therapist in my day job, artist, part-time, emerging, working on all of that. And I actually made it a point to, when I start my sessions with clients, I never ask them how they're doing. I always say, where would you like to get started today?
Interesting. Okay.
And people are like, what do you mean you're a therapist that doesn't ask your clients how they're doing? I'm like, no, it's not like I'm never checking in with them throughout like the duration of the session, but that is a starting point. Most people are so flustered, they have no idea. They really don't. So starting it with that, like, where would you like to get started? Even then, some people are like, I don't know, man, you tell me. I came to see you.
It's funny you say that because like when people ask me how I'm doing, my go-to response is usually overall I'm doing okay or I'm fine. I say I'm alive and breathing. So like I always go to like the most obvious positive thing, as opposed to like my brain just automatically like, well, like this shit's happening and blah blah blah. But I usually typically say overall I'm doing good. All things considered, I'm doing good.
Yeah. I'm a fan of globally. And it's also, I think it's an interesting question in of itself because it exposes actually a lot of social nuance in a single question that a lot of people don't think about. I saw this when I lived up in Maine. So I'm from Virginia originally, went to college up in Maine, and there was literally a campus-wide debate. Now, to qualify it, I went to a very liberal-leaning school, which is why this was even happening. But there was a campus-wide debate. There was an all-college meeting about whether or not we should ask people how they are if we don't actually care. And on the one hand, I can see how there's you shouldn't inquire after someone's well-being if you're doing this from a totally inauthentic, position. And it also raises this cultural norm of we're supposed to perform a certain level of interest in other people, right? And then it raises this other question of boundaries. What are we comfortable sharing? What are we not? What is the current social zeitgeist around what is appropriate to share? I mean, talk about like global events right now. There's like multi-front wars happening in a lot of places, but everybody's like, it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. It's like that dog cartoon of like sitting in that diner that's on fire.
Yeah.
Like that's really where a lot of folks are at because there's this fear of vulnerability that a lot of people have around talking about how they're doing. And then there's that question of how honest do you be with people that you do or don't know? And then also, what is our own, like, what is our own personal work that we've done to be able to receive another person in that state, especially if it's not something that is socially prescribed or acceptable or something that we're used to. So these are just the types of things that I think about. Everything is a massive question mark for me. So I think it's very interesting when we can engage in that process of making the familiar strange and the strange familiar. I think that's when a lot of generativity really opens up. So
Right.
that's sort of one of my guiding principles is how do I make the things that I'm familiar with strange, and how do I make the strange things familiar?
Huh. Yeah. Yeah, I just yeah, I don't know, like, because I think it's important to be aware of like what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But man, like, I mean, this is like something that I've been preaching about,
Mm-hmm.
past guests have preached about. But it's I think it's really important for your mind, for yourself to being aware of what's going on, especially like if we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna talk, saying tragedies, all the tragedies are going on, but sometimes you really just gotta hone in like on some gratitude and just be like, I could be in the fire right now. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive for thinking that way or for believing in that, that way of looking at things. But because, like, if you think about it, right, if you're like talking to someone that is so in tune with all the negative stuff globally, like, you're not gonna want to be around them because, like, especially if you're if you're just like a naturally empathetic person, you're gonna take in that shit and you're gonna take that shit home where you may be by yourself. And like, like I feel like I mean, yeah, of course you want to be empathetic of the global, you know, tragedies and stuff too, but I mean, come on, man, like at the end of the day, sometimes you got to look out for number one. You got to look out for yourself and like look out for your your state of mind and try to keep that mental fortitude stable, I
Absolutely.
yeah, so so and it's obviously for each person, it's easier said than done, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it is something to really take into consideration, especially if you're very concerned of just mental health in general, like, why do that to yourself? It's like,
And I think
it's
that
like,
that's, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, no, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think that that's where discernment and balance really come in, and the big word that I encourage people to add into their vocabulary. I encourage people to take the word "but" out and add the word "and" in.
Mm,
And the reason why is that when you use the word "but" after making a statement, you're basically striking a line through everything that you said prior to that word.
mm.
I love you, but I care about you, but I want this, but. And
Yeah,
people aren't listening to everything that you say after, like, before the but. All they hear is the
look
but
for
and
the
then what
negative
comes after
thing.
it.
Mm,
Exactly.
yeah.
Um, so for this instance, yes, there is a genocide that's happening, and wars that are potentially brewing elsewhere, and what is our personal accountability, responsibility? What can we realistically do about these things? And I sort of frame it as, how do we learn to let the world break our heart, but not break us? And this is a thing that I personally have struggled with for a very long time. I would consider myself to be a very sensitive human. B. Arthur did an interview almost as long ago as I've been alive at this point, 30 some odd years ago, where she said, I feel like an exposed nerve. I feel everything and I feel it deeply. And that's always really resonated with me. And I, personally believe that right now we're living in a cultural moment where we're trying to make people less sensitive. We're trying to make people,
Mm.
move away from the more ugly and darker sides of life. And I definitely agree that there's a balance that needs to be struck with these things. It's not about going, the toxic positivity route of we don't look at, anything that isn't good. And I also don't believe in, the nihilistic, pessimistic, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. What's the point in trying?
Mm.
It reminds me of, are you familiar with the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl?
No, so I'm gonna pause you for a moment
Yeah.
because I get, just not to make like assumptions or any
Mm.
judgments, but I'm gonna say you being in the field that you're in, I could feel myself like starting to feel a bit intimidated, just like even just
Really?
like for the sake of well, just I'm gonna say this now,
No, no,
right?
no. I'm super curious. There's no judgment here. Please. I am very
Well, I'm just
intrigued.
saying like so my motto, at least for the
Hmm.
podcast, is I'm bad at words, meaning like I need to I aspire to broaden my vocabulary. So I say a lot of mundane words and phrases and whatnot. So speaking to someone, you know, pretty intellectual compared to me, I'm like, all right, I'm gonna sound real dumb to this guy.
No, dude, not at all. That is not at all the perception that I have whatsoever. So
Okay.
the
But
no,
I'm
there.
also not big into like the books that I
Mhm.
read. I really just listen to audiobooks. It's the best
Yeah.
way I can retain anything, unfortunately. But yeah, a lot of
You have ADHD by chance?
dude, honest, I really contemplated that. Like, and I haven't I just started seeing a doctor. Like I'm having my actual appointment with my physician in a couple of days. But like I thought about it. I haven't taken like those online tests just because I'd rather speak to somebody that can diagnose it rather than me going by an assessment and be like, well, yeah, that sounds right. Maybe I do have ADHD or maybe I am autistic. Like I'd rather have a professional um
Mhm.
do the assessment with me. But so yeah, when it comes like I'm not yeah, I don't read enough books that I think I should. I'll say that.
Mhm.
The books I do read or listen to rather are mostly like self-help and like I don't want to say philosophical, but like I, the most sort of intellectual book I could say I've went through was a book called Awareness by Anthony DeMello. Does that ring
Mhm.
a bell? So
A
like
distant one. I haven't read it personally, but
okay,
I also read a lot of personal development and self help, which there's a lot of asterisks that
yeah.
go under that. But I'm familiar with that genre.
Yeah,
Haven't read
so
that one
like
specifically, but yeah.
I mean, you know, again, with the audiobook is like you get to listen to all of his like interviews and his conferences and stuff. So I retain that stuff better when I can
Mhm.
like hear the context and the tonality of their voice and stuff. It just I don't know, it just hits different.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't doubt that there's some ADHD in there. I'm also
Well,
a big
and
fan of I'm also a big fan of
go ahead.
Bruce Lee, so I'm always listening to like Bruce Lee stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, the book that you mentioned, no, never heard of it, never read it.
I think you would like it a lot, honestly, based
Okay.
off of what you just shared. Because Viktor Frankl, Dr. Frankl was a psychiatrist that actually survived the Holocaust. So he was in Auschwitz, and Man's Search for Meaning is part autobiography, part dissertation. My hot take and a few other people's hot takes is that this man survived the Holocaust by studying what helped other people survive the Holocaust. And the book really looks at his experience in the Nazi internment camps and what he was noticing about people in terms of their ability to survive these really ridiculous horrifying circumstances. And there's a scene in the book that I I had to close the book and stare at a wall for a couple of hours. Like it fucked my shit up. Like I don't know if I allowed to cuss, but like seriously, like messed me up in a good
You
way
can
and
curse,
really
don't
changed
worry
my
about it.
perspective. Where
You can totally
it fucked
curse.
me up in like the best way possible. So he had been loaded up into a cattle car and had been shipped to the internment camp. He's been stripped of all of his stuff. Like dude's arguably having the worst day that anybody could ever have. And he's in this group of people that are then shuttled to the showers,
Mm,
which, yes,
mm,
and as he's standing in the shower chamber, completely naked with all these random strangers and a couple of people that he knows, there's this really big question of what is going to come out of these shower heads. Is it going to be water or is it going to be gas? And he has absolutely no idea.
mm.
And so when the water starts flowing, he realizes in that moment that he's got a choice. He didn't choose being in an internment camp. He didn't choose being corralled by the Nazis. He chose none of the circumstances that he was currently in. Right? Nobody chooses that. He recognized that he had the choice to either understandably lament the day that he had just had, or he had the ability to be appreciative for the fact that he got a hot shower after the day that he had just had. Right? When I tell you that this forcibly made me reevaluate how I approach my life, I wish I could say that I was just being hyperbolic and dramatic. And it ties in. This is sort of like I'm rounding the clubhouse turn on this nugget, but it reminds me of something that Ram Dass said. I think it was in the little documentary called "Becoming Nobody." It was about it was a recap of his life right before his death, and one of the things that he said in the documentary that didn't make sense to me until about a year or so ago. He said, "I don't wish you the stroke, but I wish you the grace of the stroke." And to contextualize that, he was a public speaker who then had a stroke and now was all dependent on all of these people in order for him to just be able to function. And he had always been a very striving, independent, considered him a very, capable, able-bodied person. That's how he viewed himself. And now he was very much needing to rely on a team of 5 to 6 people every single day in order for him to get to this place of being able to just live. And what a challenge that was for his ego, being such a strong, independent person that now was so reliant and so interconnected on all these other people. When I've been confronted with moments of really intense adversity in my own life, especially the last couple of years, I've watched how, through a sense of trying to feel safe, a sense of trying to feel in control, people will paint themselves the absolute darkest picture that they can. They will grab the darkest colors, in their palette, and they will paint, a very dark, foreboding picture to try to prepare themselves for the worst possible outcome. And when you recognize that no amount of self-forecasting or divining or, anxiety option tree working is really going to control the outcome, it begs this question of, if you can't control the outcome, then why are you trying to forecast the worst possible outcome? Why are you trying to take control of something that you don't have control over? Why are you trying to create the illusion that there's something that you can do to prepare yourself for something that you have no ability to stop? And there are some people that find that that concept absolutely terrifying. They're like, no, I have to fight tooth and nail, and I have to try to. I've been made aware multiple times in my life that I'm not in control. The two things that I am ultimately in control of are the meaning that I make of what is going on around me and the actions that I choose to take because of that. And that is it. Everything else is colloquially let go and let God. There's not that sort of control.
Right. Damn. That's deep. Yeah, I'm certainly trying to be more in control of my actions as of late. Mostly just knowing when to filter myself, because because I'm not from here. Like you and I had a couple conversations like at markets, but I don't know if I like told you, like my wife and I were originally from northern New Jersey, and just being with the people that I'm normally with, I'm known to not have a filter. Nicole, she describes me as a loud personality. I very much, I hear TMI, man, TMI, because I just, I just talk. But I guess, the way the climate has changed in terms of, you know, social aspect of our community, society. You gotta choose wisely when and where you're gonna say the things you want to say, and just like openly express your thoughts and opinions. And so yeah, I just been trying to be more mindful of like being able to do that. Knowing when I can just talk my shit or just stay quiet and just and just move on.
And I think that's sorry if I'm going to be a bad news bear on this one. I think that's going to be a lifelong process, and I don't think that that's going to be lifelong for you uniquely because of you. I think to tie it back to where we started the conversation, there's all these questions around what do we feel comfortable comfortable sharing and receiving from other people, right?
Yeah.
And given that you're from Jersey, yeah, I would expect you to be a like from the hip kind of guy. Like that that tracks. Like that's culturally that's very appropriate. So I don't really see much of an issue with that. As a southerner, I can see how people would find that abrasive, but I lived in Yankee
Yeah.
land, as people would call it, for along several years. I was there for college and a couple years after intermittently. So culturally, it is very different. There's a lot more coquettish social interaction down here than where you're from. So yeah, I can imagine for some people they'd probably be like, "Whoa, that is way too much."
Yeah. And
It's
that's
based on
cool.
context.
Like,
And that's yeah. Go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I'm sorry. This is something I'm
No, 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 no.
um but yeah, no, that's something I'm trying to be more conscious of, like I've never, up until we moved down here, never really, I mean, with the few occasions of visiting my in-laws, but yeah, man, I was not very familiar with, the environment here. I mean, I used in the beginning when I just moved in, and like I talked about it a lot in the podcast. I'm like, it took me a while to like put my guard down and like understand, like, oh, people, to your, in your face, like people are just genuinely polite, like cashiers, like I'm not used to cashiers sparking small talk, like, so
Mm-hmm.
I had to like kind of learn to put my guard down a bit. And so yeah, again, like what you're saying, like this, kind of learning to be more conscious of like what I say and how I express myself. Yeah, I anticipate it being a very long learning process. Uh, Not that I want to ask this of the world, but I would say, people, if people that know where I come from, I just like, I hope you guys give me some leeway to to adjust. But I can't have expectations of that. So it is what it is, really. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah, the just the whole like social construct here, it is different from
Mm-hmm.
up there. We're very much in your face, in Jersey, New York, Philly. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I
That's that
mean,
differentiation that people say of New Englanders are kind but not nice, and Southerners are nice but not kind. And the way that I've sort of thought to sort of explain it to people is like when I lived in Maine, people aren't going to talk to you. They're not going to be like, "How's the wife and fam?" if they're not like really that close with you. But if there's a community member that like needs heating fuel or firewood or food, like people are going to go make sure that those things are taken care of. A big deal will not be made of the fact that it was done. You're just going to be provided for. There's not going to be a lot of fanfare. Down here, there's a lot of fanfare, but not a lot of follow through. And I know, which leads me to my other point. It's important to contextualize and not universalize. It's easy because it feels very simple and clean to kind of universalize and be like, well, it's always this and never that. The reality is that it's shades of gray that are in between.
yeah,
And wholly speaking, in New England, it's much more of a there's an actions instead of a words, and down here it's words more so than actions. You have to have a much closer relationship with people before you really get the goods. That's why I tell folks if you're hanging out with a Southerner, they don't actually want to hang out with you until one of two things has happened. One, they give you a specific time and date and activity, and they're like, "Hey, I would really love to do this," and they're like specific about it. The
mm,
other criteria is if this has been offered 3 or more times, then it is a genuine offer because people will tell you, oh my God, this was so great. It was so good to see you. It's so good to see, like, we should do this again. And then as soon as they shut the door, be like, I hope I never see them again.
ah, I'm very happy you said that because I've been feeling that for some time now. Like I've been I've been vocal about this on the podcast. I've been coming into a new community. Part of my sort of mission was to be part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've felt accepted. I've had opportunities and whatnot. Now I'm like on this verge of trying to surpass the casual friendship line. Like I would like to really build on or really develop real friendships, which I've had some success so far,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also some uh unfortunate incidents. But anyway, that's besides the point. I am learning that now. Like it's like, yeah, it's exactly what you just said. It's like I gotta they really have to like let you know when they're down for it. Cause I've heard it so many times. I'm like, yeah, we should definitely do this. And me, for just the way I am, I really take their word for it. I'm like, oh, all right, let's do that. How about next week? And they're like, oh, they start backtracking. I'm like, oh, I thought you wanted to chill. Like, because there
Yep.
have been
And
times where I try to
that's
offer that. I try to initiate, and every time I initiate it, they're like, and I'm not saying like what their reasoning isn't true, but I'm just like, oh
mm.
man, like it's just every time I'd offer something, it gets shut down.
I was on the receiving end of that in college, and this was part of the culture shock where, again, I come from a long line of people who don't genuinely care how you're doing. We're just going to say, hey, how you doing? Great, good. Like that whole, it's a whole like thing.
Mm,
And there was this, one of my classmates, we had been chatting. I didn't know her that well, like classmate in the most genuine sense of the term. Like we matriculated together. I didn't have classes with her, like nothing. We just lived on campus generally together. And me being, the good conditioned southerner that I am, I was like, oh yeah, no, it was great to chat. We should hang out sometime. And she was like, oh, I live here. And I'm like, I live on, this other place, blah, blah, blah. Never expected to see this girl outside of when I had to see her. So color me surprised when she showed up at my door one day. And I was like, can I help you? And she was like, you said that you wanted to hang out and I didn't have class and I knew that you didn't either. And I'm like, there is a human at my door that I had zero intention of spending time with. And I now cannot get out of this interaction because she thought that I actually wanted to spend time. And I get it. It's on me. I was not genuine. Okay. And like, we can talk about the whole cultural implications of inauthenticity in
right.
small talk, but it was a big, like, that was a thing for me. And it was also a thing when I would ask people how they were. And the next thing I know, I'm 25 minutes late to class.
Uh,
I mean, part of it is like, I don't want to sound too self-aggrandizing. Consistent feedback I've gotten throughout my life is that people feel comfortable talking to me. I'm a therapist. I should fucking hope so. Like, so part of that is that people feel comfortable, making those disclosures, but also culturally, it's just more accepted up there.
yeah.
If it's assumed that if you are asking a direct question, you want a direct answer, and that's a whole level of nuance that I had to learn,
Hmm.
just because there's not a it's different types of nuance in different places, which again is why, like I said before, I think it's really important to contextualize and not universalize when we have experiences, because your mileage will definitely vary.
Yeah.
Because there are people who in New England is the easiest cultural comparison for me because that's where I've been, spent the
Right.
most
Of
time
course.
between those two places. There are people who are the hardened Mainers. It's funny that how there's a reflection between like hardcore Southerners and hardcore like Mainers, New Englanders, because the only difference is the word. The Mainers will say if a cat has kittens in an oven, you don't call them muffins, do you? Like if somebody comes from out of state and has kids. In the South, the saying is if a cat has kittens in an oven, you don't call them biscuits. So it's this idea that there's this mutual exclusivity of just like heritage rooted in these places, and it doesn't matter if you move in between them. But that social nuance of this idea of belonging, people from away, it's hilarious to me because I literally just went north, but it's the same attitude on a different end of the political spectrum. And seeing that kind of, oh, everywhere I go, it's the same, has been a very interesting experience for me. It's just flipping the
Hmm.
embroidery. Am I looking at the front or am I looking at the back? And
Mm,
with that approach in mind, everywhere I go, that's always the question I'm asking: is this the front or is this the back?
mm. Well, I'm gonna say at least with me, you're looking inside me. No. I mean, I like to think that I like to think like when you get to interact with me for the first time, like I kind of put it all on the table. Like I've described it as like a stand-up comedian trying to win the crowd. Like like I also believe like I do have like a lot of characteristics of like a natural stand-up. Like I just want to make people laugh. I want to make them feel good. A lot of people pleasing. Um, but I really do try to like stick to my word. And this kind
Mhm.
of actually makes me think of this because when you and I were early on, um, talking and stuff, we've talked about trying to get together for like,
Mhm.
like a coffee or I drink tea, but just getting together for a
Yeah.
drink. Obviously that hasn't come to fruition. I mean, I take part blame for that because I've realized how much of a homebody I've become because of the lack of being social, like just actually going out and being social as opposed to being social while we're
Hmm.
working at markets. Like that's so much easier.
Yeah.
And you know, it's nowadays it takes a lot of effort to really go out and meet up somewhere. Um, but yeah, so like now I'm gonna ask you this. I'm gonna kind of put you on the
Mhm.
spot.
Okay.
Now, when we agreed to like, you know, meet up for a drink,
Hmm. That was
was that
absolutely
like the
genuine.
I'm sorry?
So that was absolutely genuine, and I'm not just saying that because
Okay.
I'm being put on. It's not because that's the only acceptable answer. If let me put it this way, if it wasn't genuine, I wouldn't be sitting here across from you like right now. Like
Right.
I wouldn't have done any of this. I think that choosing to be intentional and choosing to be genuine with people instead of parlaying in that nuance, yeah, it ruffles people's feathers. Absolutely, especially folks like I'm in like rural Appalachia right now. Okay. So if I'm going into, a diner that's got a bunch of cotton balls, 60, 70-year-old ladies that have got the perms and stuff like that, there's a whole different set of manners and demeanor that I'm utilizing with those folks versus somebody that's either closer to my age or that I know that is somewhere else. Because I know that they're expecting something of me based off of what I look like and all this and a certain amount of deference and respect. People my age don't need or require or expect that.
Mm,
And I have just gotten to the point where I value myself and other people enough that if I know that it's not a good fit, why would I waste both of our times? And that's just not limited to like relationships in terms of romantic relationships, business relationships, like meeting other artists and like if it ain't a fit, it ain't a fit. Why would I create a situation where we're setting both of us up for failure, right?
right,
Like
right. Because I
I
still would,
value you enough as a human to not want to waste your time.
yeah, yeah. Because I would still like to have that drink sometime. I would like to make that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because you're in your where are you in? Are you in Fredericksburg or where?
Well, I was living in Richmond, and then I'm actually currently living in Stanton. I got priced
Yeah.
out of Richmond because they raised my rent 20% 2 years in a row, and the only other people who get to raise their income like that are Congress and landlords, and not
Mm.
anybody else. So, I
So
live
you
up in the mountains now,
so how so you're like an hour? Is that like an hour away or so?
about hour 45, depending on traffic. If you
Okay.
take the back way, it's like 2 hours and 47 minutes or something, but that's because you're going like 55 the whole time.
Mm. Okay. Now I know that. So
Yeah.
okay.
I'm in Richmond pretty regularly though, especially since vendor season is getting ready to get started, like the moon markets and Basic City and things like that. So I will be in Richmond regularly from April to October. So trust and believe we will definitely
Well
have some
then,
overlap.
well we'll certainly be crossing paths and I'll make a point to come visit. You know, that's what I was doing when you booked that whole line of pop-ups. I was like, my God. But you know, yeah, I mean every time you're working, when I wasn't working, I try to show support, some solidarity by visiting at least. But there is
Absolutely.
very much that you like you said, you make people feel comfortable because that was definitely the case every time we did converse. I was like, I would always get to that point. I'm like, fuck, I'm like like I'm taking him away from attendees that want to check out his
Mm-mm.
table. So that I would like mosey my way like to the side of your table and just talk to you then. But I'm trying to be better about that too with other vendors, like because like yeah, it's for me at least. It's like it's so easy for me to like get into a real engaging conversation and get out of it. Like
Mm-hmm.
um, but you know, I'm gonna tell you, if you like ever find yourself doing like a back to back, like a Saturday and Sunday thing to avoid the commute, I'm I welcome I open my home to you because now
Well,
we have a
thank you. I
house,
appreciate that.
we have a spare bedroom with a bed. So yeah, I would totally
Word.
my wife Nicole, like you guys are
We've
acquainted.
met a couple times. I've not
Yeah,
had the ability to like spend extensive time with y'all, which again would
of
like to,
course.
but again, humans and adults life, and I think that that points to the hard conversation, because I think that this is me doing my thing. What I see you sort of pointing at in this is that a lot of people have a hard time having the conversation with themselves about who are they really versus who do they like the idea of themselves being.
Right.
And underneath that, to your point about that, it was almost a chicken and the egg of like, well, I'm not getting out of the house as much because I'm being shut, down for these social interactions, but I'm also not leaving the house as much when it is offered. This is a semi-controversial opinion, but it's one that I've seen enough in my personal and professional life that I believe that it's true. When it comes to mental health, it's not just a mental issue. There are physiological things that contribute to this as well. But what people don't understand is that things like anxiety and depression, in addition to being experiences that we have, they are also habits. And this is what happens when people become habituated to a specific way of being, whether they are habituated to being depressed, being anxious, whatever it might be. Okay. And where I see this happening is that people will have what's called emotional amelioration or resolution. So the emotional symptoms of feeling sad, feeling lethargic, feeling really depressed, those things will go away. A person will have an improvement in their emotional quality of life, but they will still struggle with social interactions, with bathing on a regular basis, with keeping their space clean, because they become habituated through action and routine and regularity to living this lifestyle, even when there's not an emotional impetus for that to still be happening. And people are afraid sometimes to conceptualize themselves as being something other than what they're used to conceptualizing themselves as. Sometimes the most threatening thing to a person who's experienced trauma is to ask them to not conceptualize themselves as a traumatized person.
Yeah.
Because they don't know who they are without that. And it's about, are we willing to discover who we are outside of, these thoughts that we think about who we are, or these conceptualizations that we have of ourselves? Are we willing to be expansive in that regard and find something else outside of it? I'm not always brave. Don't get me wrong. Listen, there are plenty of days where I peer over that cliff and I'm like, nah, son, that ain't for me. I ain't trying. I ain't changing. I am perfectly content with where things are. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And then there are other days where Brene Brown she's a social worker. If you're not familiar with her, she did the vulnerability TED Talk. That woman is my personal and professional hero. If I could achieve half of her wisdom and insight and just decorum and charisma, I would die a very successful man. And something that she talks about a lot is this idea of you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't choose both. You have to choose one or the other. Because when you're comfortable, you're not challenging yourself, you're not growing. But when you're courageous, you are by default doing things that scare you. And it's funny to me, especially in my work with men, and this is something that you might relate to. There's this idea that we're supposed to be brave and courageous without being afraid.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
And it's like, son, that ain't how that works. Courage and bravery are predicated on the presence of fear. They are not things that happen in the absence, but in the presence of. Right. So that's a weird self-defeating cycle that people get themselves into. They think that they're supposed to be brave without being afraid.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you hear like combat athletes, even like people in the forest, like, they do all these brave things, and it's like, oh, are you ever scared when you have to do this? Like, yeah, all the time, but they still do it because, it's like, it's their duty, or it's it's their job. Doesn't mean that they're not afraid. Mike Tyson, there's like, clips of him saying like, what is it? I think he says he like he cries before every fight because, this might be a little off the whole what we're talking about, but like, at least his thing is like, he knows because he's aware of like what he's gonna do to his opponent. But that doesn't mean like he's still not afraid of the task at hand, right? But I think that also speaks to like with a lot of, again, like military, police officers, and other fighters. Like, yeah, there's always those nerves, that fear going into their job because it's dangerous. How can you be? Mike Tyson's famously known for being hypnotized before every fight, so that all like there is no Mike Tyson when he's in the fight. There's just the task at hand, and he's like just the vessel that gets the job done. But the kind of I actually wanted, you really perked my brain about like, the habits that we have that may prevent
Mhm.
us from like going out and whatnot. Because I've been kind of like, I'm like in my own head all the time. So I'm like, for me, I don't want to say it's totally like, I don't want to say it's like the anxiety and all that, like the
Mhm.
social anxiety and trauma that like that goes on. But for me, it's like I've realized, because like I said, I'm a homebody, and I say that because my habits, not so much of like the emotional habits, but just the habit, like I'm an early bird. So, you know, I, at least with my day-to-day routine, by 5 o'clock, I'm starting dinner when Nicole gets home. And after dinner, which is like, around 7:30, I'm like settled down. Like it's just hard to kind of like, get perked back up to go out to do more
Mhm.
exciting things, let's say. So, and I'm an early bird in that, like, shit, by 8:30, we're already crawling to bed. I get up at 5 a.m. So it's like just my whole, just the way I operate in itself is like usually kind of one of the things that may prevent me from like wanting to go out for a social, like I know there's this group called RVA Thriving Artists. They always have these like Thursday night. I think it's like every fourth Thursday night. They all these artists that are familiar with each other at the Artworks Gallery. They get together and have drinks together and whatnot. And like I've always
Mhm.
wanted to be part of that. I've only been to one, but there is that anxiety of like not knowing everybody. But it's more so of like this thing happens at like 7 o'clock, and like I'm already just finishing dinner. I'm like, I'm the food coma's kicking in, and like I'm ready just to like veg out. And that's like
Mhm.
part of my dilemma at least. But I'm not saying there's no anxieties like on top of that. There's definitely some anxiety about it. But yeah, it's just like breaking out of routine of like, fuck it. Like, even though I'm still gonna get up at 5 a.m., like, yeah, it doesn't hurt to go out for like an hour or two, even if I'm
Mhm.
gonna be out till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Like, it's all right. But it's just like just one of those hurdles that it takes me to kind of get over. It takes a while for me to get over.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it just I've been trying to be more conscious of like, yeah, I got to get out of my comfort zone if I want to make these things happen, create these relationships and friendships. But it takes two to tango. So if I know like the other person's intent about it,
Mhm.
it makes it easier to come out. So
Absolutely.
yeah, damn, what a brilliant podcast this has been. So
Well,
I'm
I
sorry.
think that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry that this has kind of turned into like a, I don't want to call it a therapy session or what, but I'm
There,
enjoying
the
it so far. So I hope this is like okay for you.
Oh, absolutely. And honestly, it's the Venn diagram between who I am personally and professionally is almost a circle. Not quite. Like there are some things that are different. I had actually one of my early life mentors. She was my geometry teacher in high school, and she wrote me recommendation letters for both my undergraduate and graduate programs. So she's been a solid supporter, and it's been fun to get to know her as an adult because I met her when I was 14. So I'm going to be 32 next month, so getting to know each other as adults is cool. And something that she had asked me was like, what's the difference, if any, between who you are personally and who you are professionally. And I think there are some really big differences in the sense of there's nothing that doesn't organically exist within me when I'm working, when I am like therapist Alistair and I am sitting in session across from one of my clients. It's more of like I take the best parts of me and like shoot them full of steroids and polish them up really bright and shiny, and like it's just beefy. Like it's all the really good muscles that you want to have developed that are just there.
Yeah.
In my personal life, there's the biggest difference I think I can make is that there's not as much of an extension of grace. So if somebody says something wild and out of pocket in session, I'm going to handle that very differently than I would like out in the street. Obviously, because there are different rules for that. And there was actually an instance where I had a client that was talking about a health issue and basically made a racist statement around it, and then ended up being like, yeah, we need to punch those people because, you know, they made this illness. And I'm like, well, it took a moment because like Alistaire of the streets is like, motherfucker, you wrong, and here's everything that's
Yeah.
wrong about this. But therapist me is like, wow, there's a lot here. There is a lot that is bubbling up here in this moment. And I again, controversial opinion, but my personal experience is that it's true for me. I think you can lovingly shame people. And what I mean by that is, so that my client had said this, and I looked at them and I said, you know, this is, and for the record, this is not anything that's like HIPAA. I'm not in any risk of like violating personal stuff here. I've looked up the guidelines for this. If I'm not doing personally identifiable information and things where people can, you know, readily identify themselves, then that's the area. I don't know if you want to include this in the podcast or if you want to cut it out, but that's the fine print for me is what are the things that are okay to talk about.
Right.
So I had this instance with this client who said this really racist thing in session. And, you know, regular me would have been like swinging. Therapeutic me is like, okay, so there's a lot of misunderstandings and there's a lot of other stuff that's just coming to the surface here. And when I talk about lovingly, like you shaming people with love and doing that in a loving way, I said to this person, well, you know, here's actually what the World Health Organization says about that. And also, I don't think that you're aware of this, but what you're saying is actually advocating for a hate crime. And I don't think that that's something that you would conscientiously choose to do, because I know you to be a much more empathetic and caring and compassionate person than that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there are moments where would I absolutely love to be able to utilize that all the time in my, you know, personal life. Absolutely. But like, I got to be a human, man. Like I cannot be an unending well of grace for every single person on the face of the planet. Like
Right.
I would love to be, but that's not sustainable. And so the permission that I give myself in my personal life is that if I don't have a certain relationship or proximity to people, the shorthand is that I'm not required to be nice to people that are mean to me. That doesn't mean that I'm going out being an active asshole to folks, but I'm always going to assume best intent and that it's not my problem until somebody makes it my problem. And then it's a different kettle of fish at that point. But my general operation is just to kind of do my own thing. I recognize other people have a lot going on, and I try not to engage unless I absolutely have to. Right. A way for me to sort of describe my job and sort of the perks that it gives me is that being a therapist and navigating the world is a lot like, do you ever watch Dragon Ball Z?
Dude, I fucking grew up on that shit.
All right. I had assumed, but like, I just wanted to ask, like, just in case. So like, you know, when like Vegeta and his crew first show up and they've got like those little viewfinder things that like,
I have one.
So it's a lot like having a viewfinder where there's little pop-up information around things. So like I was at Waffle House this morning and I noticed that, you know, the waitress that was around me was just constantly making self-deprecating remarks of just like, oh, I'm just here to mess things up, or I'm just doing such a bad job, like just continual. And she's got no awareness of this. But to me, I'm like, oh, that's a slow drip of caustic, poor self-esteem that somebody somewhere along the lines made you feel like you need to live your life in the shape of an apology. And that's not how humans are meant to live their lives.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately what I choose to do with that information, right? Like all these notifications will pop up around people around what, you know, these potential troubleshooting issues are. It's not my job to fix them. 1, I can't. 2, not my job. 3, people work on themselves. Any and all change happens from inside. Ultimately, I'm on the outside nudging and pushing and trying to, you know, facilitate and catalyze that for people. But I don't fix people. I don't change people. And that's why I think it's hilarious when people come to session and they're like, I can't get this person to change. No, really? You don't say. And that's the difference, I think, between therapists that last and therapists that don't. The ones that last are the ones that they recognize that they can't save people. They're not ultimately responsible for them, and all they can do is really love people through things. There's this concept in therapy called unconditional positive regard, right? And for me, and I came to this conclusion in grad school. This is not a new thing. I've always been very hippie, heart on my sleeve kind of human. I care very deeply about people. So for me, when I hear unconditional positive regard, which means always being happy to see your client, regardless of the state that they show up in, regardless of the things that they have done, regardless of what they say. You know, it doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. but you never create or consciously create within, your client a sense of I am disapproving of you. The goal is that you always feel received by that person. And for me, that's ultimately saying, how do we love people through things?
Mm.
Because that's really what it is. And my approach to therapy is very relational because I view myself as a projection screen for all the different types of stuff that people have gone through. It was really weird for me at the start of my career to have a 16-year-old project her daddy issues on me because I'm not old enough to be her father.
Mm.
But the reality is that I'm a man in a position of authority in her life, which close enough to dad, right?
Yeah.
So knowing that I'm archetypically, that's the right word, archetypically being projected on for, the different roles that people have had in their life, I see my job as offering that reparative experience. And so the medicine of who I am that I offer, to people in my day-to-day life, but also to clients, is proximity and perspective. And what I mean by that is that the proximity part is that I love people up close, which is incredibly uncomfortable, for some people that are convinced that love is a dangerous thing, and that's based off of well-founded experiences that they have had, and through a combination of my own life experiences and the things that I've experienced professionally. It really takes a lot for me to have my cage rattled. I'm not saying that it's impossible, and this is not an invitation from the universe to do so, but like I've been with a lot of people in a lot of different walks of life, between working in a hospital system and outpatient therapy and everything. I've sat across from thousands of people at this point, right? And everybody just wants to be loved. Everybody wants to be seen and accepted and heard and told that regardless of how they show up, they are still worth loving. That has a different manifestation, depending on what someone's been through. But my job at the end of the day is to love people up close. That's that proximity piece, and then the perspective is just, I just see things different, man. I'm not saying it's like the ultimate perspective to have. I'm not saying that people should adhere to it or anything like that, but it's I just see things from a different angle compared to a lot of folks that I know, and that has been really wonderful in the sense that it's been great for my creative career, not just like therapeutically, but artistically. But it also gets me in trouble because if it's not the prevailing perspective of the rooms that I'm in, that can be uncomfortable to dangerous depending on what it is. But I think that having a handle on both of those things, that proximity, and that perspective, knowing where the shortfalls are in that, are also how I can continue to use that to my benefit, my clients' benefit, other people, because I feel like those are two experiences that are really missing. We're not very good at loving people up close culturally, and we're not very good at being able to step outside of our own experiences. And I think that if those were two things we were capable of doing a little bit more frequently, I think things would change on a tectonic level pretty rapidly.
Yeah. How would you what would you suggest like could be the thing that helps with that? Like, because I always equate like social media really kind of like, yeah, okay. So are we on it sounds like we might be on the same page about it.
It's
Because I
I
really feel like, because I used to, it really wasn't until someone told me, someone here told me, like I didn't think I had social anxiety until, I mean, I don't want to say since I moved here, but like,
mhm.
I mean, sure, COVID like did it, the quarantine, that all that really, had played a part too. But like, I just feel like the last couple years, it's like, fuck, yeah, I got some social anxiety that I developed since living here because of, just some of the ups and downs of trying to, make an effort of like becoming closer with some people that I was like really, genuinely trying to get
Mhm.
close to and intentionally, but it was, and because it never worked out for whatever reasons, it's like, it became discouraging. And then I guess that kind of, exacerbated my anxiety. So I'm like, I just feel like with social media, it's just so easy to like, to ghost people and like you just say things for the surface of it, be like, yeah, cool. And then like, when someone tries to hold you sort of accountable or like take you for your word and you back out, it's just like, oh, like, so did you not mean what you said? Kind of like going back to what we were talking about earlier. So like I kind of like I tend to equate social the heavy use of social media, um, that affecting the way we all communicate like in
Hmm.
person.
Yeah.
Like I said it so many times, but like I've developed so much like some great friendships with people globally
Hmm.
than people here in the city I live in. And it's like, why is that? Like, because like I do believe that the social media, it's great for some things, but then when it comes to like something like right here right now, it's like, it's just like it seems like it seems to hurt it. So I'm like, man.
And I think that much like you, I think it's a dual-edged sword. I think that there can be some really great benefits of social media. The problem is that people don't understand that social media is a performance. And
Yes.
I think that that's, you could call it the fault of a variety of intersecting things, but all in all, the car crash that we arrive at is that people don't have the ability to distinguish between what is a curated, manicured image that is intentionally presented to them for a specific reason, whether that's an idea influencing, getting other people to think, like whatever. It's a form of manipulation. It's an expansive word. I can get to that in a minute, but it's a form of manipulation, and people take it as gospel truth, and they don't understand that that's not how it actually looks. And I think that when people don't have that ability to discern between what is performance and then what is tangibly happening in front of them in their lives, I think then that's when there's a lot of despair and ennui and comparison, starts happening. And I think that, yeah, that absolutely has a deleterious effect on people's mental health.
Yeah.
Something that's worth noting that actually ties back to what we, started talking about in terms of how do we balance all this negative stuff that's going on, with the positive. Published data, like you can go to Google Scholar or wherever and look this shit up. Published data shows that negatively charged content and headlines and news media gets up to 2.5 times more engagement than something that is
Hmm.
positive.
Yeah.
And this is something that, like, do you mind if I go on a little TED talk here? Because this is
Go
going to get
for it.
okay. So what's happening there is a level of unconsciousness that people don't know about because we're not taught about it. Okay. So there's two general domains of the self. There's the cognitive, which is your mental, everything in your dome. And then there is the somatic, which is the physical. Okay. And you can argue the spiritual is a synthesis of those things, but for the sake of mental health and this stuff, there's the cognitive and the somatic, right? Most people that I meet, G, I ask them, do you live from the neck up or the neck down? And people are like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, do you made like basically and mainly view yourself as a walking head navigating through the world, or do you actually feel like you have a present embodied experience? And most people tell me that they live from the neck up. And that's because people are so trapped in their mind that they are not at all aware physically with what their response is. And so when we look at with like news media consumption and that negative 2.5 times more engagement versus the positive, what's happening is that when we encounter distressing material and we have a nervous system that is fried from constantly being exposed to distressing, traumatizing material, that's going to get a super fast uptake.
Mm.
Because when your nervous system, when you think about the wiring for your body in this way, the same way that you would like an ADT home system, okay? Your nervous system is what determines your level of safety in any given moment. There's this nifty thing that your body does where it subconsciously is reading the room at any given point in time to determine how safe you are. This is not a conscious thought process. Your body just does this. The vagus nerve specifically is the main actor in all this. And it's a big nerve that goes up in the back of your head and it goes down into your respiratory and digestive systems. Okay. And this is the nerve that is responsible for communicating from the part of your brain called the amygdala. And that's your fight or flight response.
Hmm.
Okay.
Sounds familiar.
So what's happening is that your nervous system is responsible for determining your safety, right? If your system is constantly exposed to activation, what happens over time is that your body starts to read disequilibrium as equilibrium, meaning you don't feel safe unless there is a lack of safety. Another way of looking at this is something that came out a couple of years ago, or not a couple of years, excuse me, a couple months ago, talking about if you relax to true crime, you have trauma. Like, because what it is that there is a, if you find distressing material calming, then that's a symptom of the fact that your nervous system is slanted towards this dysregulation as regulation. You are habituated, you are conditioned, your body is accustomed to activation, and really what is a fear response is a sense of safety. And that's the really huge physical hurdle that people have to overcome. Last example I'll give before I know I'm kind of rounding the clubhouse turn here.
I'm enjoying this.
But like relationships, okay? And I recently discovered this for myself too. I am in the process of consciously dating for the first time after being, intentionally single for a while and working on myself. And one of the really big myths that I've had to sort of bust for myself is that, when I get this full body reaction to being around somebody in our regular Western romantic culture, that's viewed as a sign of like, oh, that's the one, like your whole body is, being set off. Nah, son, that's your nervous system being like, that's a dangerous person. Don't go there. Danger. Do not go. But because we have confused ourselves around these danger signals, and because, fear-based arousal and sexual arousal feel almost identical, the only difference is the context. People are orienting themselves to what is realistically a warning sign that somebody is not good for them, but is taking that as a sign of, oh, because I'm having this overwhelming response, clearly I am made for this. No, that's your body telling you danger, stay away. But people are convinced that unless they have this really, large systemic reaction, that they're not compatible with the person. And I saw this talked about in a different podcast elsewhere. But this idea that, chemistry is overrated. Because it's not that you shouldn't have any, but if what you're doing is prioritizing the chemistry, you're not actually getting to know the person. You're just pushing the buttons neurochemically that make you like the idea of this person, instead of who they've actually demonstrated themselves to be to you, right? So that's part of that retraining, because again, my nervous system, like when I met this first person that woke my body up in a way where I was like, oh, I would date you. I was like, oh, wow, this is hella not safe. Like my body is telling me that this is not a safe place to go. But because of the conditioning that I had, I was taught to equate that with attraction. No, that's actually danger. Danger, Will Robinson, danger.
Kind of like drugs.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason that they say that like love is a drug, because the first, I think it's like year to year and a half that you're in a relationship, the neurochemical cocktail is similar to that of somebody who's in active addiction. There's a lot of dopamine and serotonin, and you're trying to mash those buttons over and over and over and over again to try to stay in that peak state.
Wow.
So how does this have to do with the activating stuff? So again, nervous system, when we are habituated to disequilibrium as equilibrium, of course, we're going to watch compilations of Karens shouting at people on TikTok for 15 minutes. Of course, we're going to click on the headline about war-torn country here. Of course, we are going to look at, old man beats lady and dropping. Like, when you understand that people are not conscious of the fact that they have been traumatized and conditioned to seek out traumatizing and violent material, and they view that as normal, like if there's not an awareness of that, people aren't going to register. And that's why the positivity movement, for lack of a better phrase, has such a hard time getting traction, because from a nervous system level, culturally, we're all friggin' fried, man.
Yeah.
Like people are not aware of the fact that they're having the physical responses and sensations that they are. And when you were asking that question of, how do we address this? If you've not seen Atlas of the Heart with Brene Brown or read the book, it's on HBO Max. I strongly encourage you to go see it. Her response to that question is basically self-literacy. Her preposition and all of that is that we can never truly know what is going on inside of another person because we're not having that experience. The closest that we can get to that is becoming very literate and very fluent in our own experiences and our own emotions and our own physical sensations, and then being able to compare and then offer that in an empathetic way of, it sounds like you're feeling this, or, that, instead of just labeling things for people. And I am guilty of having to watch that, in my work as a therapist. There are times where, I'm guilty of thinking I've got somebody figured out. And then my client will surprise me in some way where it's like, oh no, I definitely put this person in a box when I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But that's part of being human. And that's part of the approach that I have, with my clients, is that they all know that I'm a person. I don't broadcast my trauma. I don't work out, my stuff with them. But how you see me right now is how I show up to session. This is my background. This is where I sit. This is what I do. And I think that that's part of what makes me effective at it, is that I'm just another person. There's a Carl Jung quote where he says, know all theories, master all techniques, but when touching another human soul, be just another human soul. So yeah, I've got a master's degree. I got a shit ton of certificates. I've got all this training, but none of that means anything when I'm sitting across from somebody who's having the absolute worst day of their life.
Mm. God
It's
damn.
not about the pieces of paper. It's about how do I sit in this place of pain with this person and not judge them and not try to fix it for them and not convey that what they're experiencing is uncomfortable for me. Because people don't understand that when they rush to help somebody in pain, what you're really communicating to that person is, I can't handle you. I can't handle your emotional state. I can't handle what this is, and I need to fix it. I need to fix you.
Mm.
And that's hella invalidating, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you've had moments in your own life where you've been like really deep in your despair and you didn't want somebody to fix it. Like, yeah, you wanted shit to be different, but like, you didn't want somebody to hand you an answer. You just wanted somebody to sit in it and look at you and go, you know what, man? That fucking sucks.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I even had instances where like I had a friend try to console me, and then it went from like them checking in on me and see how I'm doing to like going into this debate where I felt like I was defending myself for feeling the things I felt or having the, you know, indifferent opinions than others. And I'm like, what the fuck? I thought you were supposed to be my homeboy, like checking in on me. But like now I feel like we just like spend an hour of me like trying to defend my my opinions. Like, what the hell was that? Like, I don't know if that's like in correlation to what we're talking about here, but like,
it's
you
a lack
know,
of validation. Like, that's so when I see this mistake all the time, and it's I get that I'm privileged in the sense of I do mental health for a living. So I am admittedly more literate in this than your average bear. So me saying things like it surprises me how much, illiteracy there is in these things. I recognize that's a privileged thing to say because of what I do.
yeah.
People don't understand that in order to validate somebody else's emotional experience, you do not have to agree with it.
Mhm.
It's literally just saying, yeah, if that was happening to me and I thought that this is what that meant, I would be this upset too. It's not, I agree with you.
Right.
It's not, I am acquiescing my position and I surrender. I'm trying to think of like a low hanging fruit example. So say that your wife is upset that your socks never make it in the laundry basket. Okay. And she comes to you and she's like, gee, I love you. Sugar pie, honey bunch. It drives me fucking insane that you will not put your socks in the basket. It's really right there. Can you please just put your socks in the basket? It makes me feel really upset and disrespected because it's literally right there and you're putting the socks right next to the basket instead of in them. So can you please not? The invalidating response is, you're making a big deal out of this. It's not that hard to just pick it up and put them in the basket. I don't understand why you're doing this. Like, this is out of context, out of proportion. You're great, whatever. Right. Validating her would look like, you know what, honey? If I felt really disrespected because I felt like something really basic was intentionally not being done, I'd be really upset too.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Because I,
Listening, you're welcome. Like, that's
yeah,
literally what that looks like. That is,
yeah.
notice that I'm not saying yes. Notice that I have ceded no ground. All I'm saying is, if I thought somebody was doing something intentionally disrespectful and wasting my time or not respecting me, I would be really upset about that too.
Yeah. Hmm. God damn.
It's the little shifts, man. That's why I'm telling you. Shift the words from but to and then recognizing that, again, validation doesn't mean that you agree. It just means putting yourself in that person's shoes and being like, yeah, I'd feel that way too. Don't do that if you don't actually feel that way. If you're not able to empathize with how that person's feeling, don't do that. That's bad. That's
Yeah.
disingenuine. Don't do that. But this is a mistake that I see people make, especially in power struggles and relationships. And also, spoiler alert: if your partner is fussing at you about the sink or dishes or socks, it is not actually about the sink, the dishes, or the socks. It's about what it represents. People very
Right.
rarely actually fight about what they're fighting about. So in this example that I gave you, your wife isn't actually upset about the socks. She's upset about the disrespect.
Yeah.
The socks are a
Oh,
symbol of the
I
disrespect.
totally get that. No, because I have an instance in my head. Like I have a great example. Although like part of me is like maybe I'm being a little bitch about it. But there is a thing between me and Nicole that I'm the one that fusses about something, and I mean I feel bad if I put her on blast. Like maybe we could talk about it off
Yeah.
recording, but if you wanted to hear it. But yeah, there's something very similar to that kind of scenario that I find myself in reality with with Nicole. And I don't know if she quite sees it the way I do. I mean, I try to explain it to her, but I don't know if it's like clicked or what.
Mhm.
But
The reflection question I'll give you on that one without knowing a lot of the specifics, and this is the result of a conversation that I heard elsewhere. Obviously, you got to contextualize. This is not a universalized thing.
yeah.
The fastest way to solve a problem is to decide that it's not one. Now,
Mm,
obviously, the context on that, it's not like I'm looking at world hunger or genocide or any of the other ills of the world and saying that's not a problem. It's not like, no, I hear the shouts from the internet of the really like reductionist thinking around
yeah.
this. So that's the instant, combat that I have to put at that. But like, let's say,
I really kind of want to talk about, but I'm like, I also will feel like I need to pay you for this kind of discussion.
let me just couch it this way. So let's say that like you have an issue with where she puts her things when she comes in, right? Now you can make a whole thing about how like I know that when you come in, you put your bag here, but if you could please just hang it up because that way when I'm cleaning, I don't have to pick it up and do this thing. Like you could go through the whole process of explaining to her why this is an issue for you and all of that and that rigmarole, or you can weigh that against the question of, is this really an issue? Or is this a symptom of something else? So for you, is your thing really about whatever this is, or is it about what it represents? So the socks weren't really what the argument was about in the initial example. It's about the disrespect. So I'm curious for you if it's a deeper issue of, does it need to be an issue? One. And if it is, what is it a symptom of? Because what you're upset about on the surface is not actually what it is at the root. There's
Yeah.
something else underneath that's attached to it.
I mean, can we? I'm open to talk about it if you're down for it.
It's your podcast, man. You get to decide what you're going to put up, what you're
I
not,
know,
how
but
you're
then
going to
like
edit. So.
I'm afraid I'm gonna turn this into an actual therapy session, and I don't want you to have to work when you're now, when
Dude, I'm not, I am civilian Alistair right now.
okay,
Like I said, there's an overlap between these things, but I'm not like on right now.
okay, because like this could very much be like me overreacting. So like I'm just because that's the thing about me. Sometimes I'm like, sometimes I feel like this is a valid thing, and then the other side of me is like thinking like, this isn't really a big deal. Like, so I'm always like hopping the fence. Like, is this really a valid concern for me, or is this just me being like, I don't know, superficial or whatever the word, the correct word would be, like just, you're blowing it out of proportion or whatever. So I'm always like flip-flopping because I just don't know. Before we get into it, can we take a quick bathroom break?
Absolutely.
I don't know how you are on time because this has been a brilliant podcast. So I don't like I want to be mindful of your time.
No, I don't work today. This was the only thing that was like on my schedule. So if I can give you more content for you to rifle through and edit and pick and do whatever you want, I'm happy to do that, man.
I'm having a great time. So as long as like we're both on the same page with that, we'll keep going. But I do have to take a piss because I've been drinking a lot of water.
Do your thing, man.
Be right back.
Yep.
Hey guys, if you're wondering why you're seeing me with a different shirt on, it is because I had to split this episode into two parts because the entirety of it is actually 4 hours long. But if you've been watching or listening up to this point, I want to thank you for joining us. And if you have been enjoying this episode, please follow if you're listening, subscribe if you're watching, ring the notification bell. That way you're aware of when part 2 is uploaded. And if you want to check out our artwork on social media, the links are provided down below. And feel free if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section on YouTube, or you can hit me up or hit up Alistair on social media. And so do all the things that are necessary to help with the growth of the podcast, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay driven. And we will catch you on the next one. Peace.